and I am the founding board member and the executive director of Center for Common Ground. Joining me in presenting tonight will be Noah Barron, our partner from the Worker Circle. Noah, say hi, everybody.
Hi everyone. Yeah, as Andrea said, I'm Noah Barron and I'm the social justice organizer at the Worker Circle. And for those of you who don't know what the Worker Circle is, we are a national secular Jewish social justice organization founded over 120 years ago by Eastern European immigrants who came to the US fleeing autocracy and persecution and seeking democratic freedoms. And that history drives our work today for an inclusive democracy and human equality. Our organization's rooted in Jewish culture, but you do not have to be Jewish to be a part of our activist community. We welcome everyone who shares our values and wants to build a better and more beautiful world for everyone. So,
And that's beautiful, Noah. I always love hearing the background of the Workers' Circle. It is so rich and so wonderful.
thanks so much, Andrea. And we love working with the Center for Common Ground. So we're excited to talk tonight about a piece of legislation and how you can meet with your Congress members.
All right. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And tonight, let's get it in present mode. Here we are. Tonight, we are going to be talking about how to advocate for voting rights in your hometown. And we're going to be doing a bill that is very, very special to me. Since Center for Common Ground is a civil rights, voting rights organization, we work very, very hard on making sure that people who are marginalized will be able to participate in voting. Our legislation in the month of May is the Inclusive Democracy Act. The Senate bill is Senate S 3423 by Peter Welch, and there are currently five co-sponsors. In the House, the bill number is H.R. 6643 by Ayanna Pressley, and there are 23 Democrat only co sponsors. And now that means we have a tremendous opportunity to work on gathering co sponsors for this bill. Since there are 535 House members and only 23 are currently co sponsors. Now, what does this bill do? Well, the right of citizens of the United States to vote in any federal election will no longer be denied by any state because someone has been convicted of a felony in the past. Right now, there is this patchwork of one state, Virginia, Kentucky, Iowa, say, oh, if you have a felony conviction, it's lifetime disenfranchisement unless or until your rights are restored by the governor. Maine and Vermont, people vote from prison. There's just all kinds of things. Different states are all doing it a different way. Florida said, well, your rights are can be restored when you get released from prison, provided you've paid all your fines and fees and you're off probation. And so people coming out of incarceration are understandably very, very confused. And in some states, Texas, voting while you have a felony conviction and you have not been pardoned or having your rights restored is a felony in and of itself. So this bill says, you know what? All that goes away. If you are a U.S. citizen, you don't lose your citizenship with a felony conviction, and you are of voting age, you don't get younger with a felony conviction. You are free and you will be able to vote in a federal election. It also says that while people are in prison, they will be able to register and vote. And it also says that the Election Assistance Commission will notify everybody that the rule has changed. We run into so many people who believe they never will be able to vote, and they don't even live in a state that's lifetime disenfranchisement, but they met someone who did live in a state, and they just believe, oh, if Virginia is that way, then all states must be that way. And it really, really, really isn't true. Now, we have a list of the 23 co-sponsors. So if any of these representatives are your representative, then you will be sending them a thank you letter. If none of these representatives are yours, you will be sending them the standard letter asking them to co-sponsor and vote for the bill. And we have the letters if a co-sponsor, and the only difference is it says, we thank you for co-sponsoring the bill. And then if they are not a co-sponsor, we urge them to co-sponsor the bill. So it is a very, very simple bill. Interesting point of history. It used to be called the Democracy Restoration Act. And I must say, I like the new name of the bill much, much better. All right, we are moving along. When we talk about voting, we at Center for Common Ground and the Workers Circle always want to emphasize voting must be available to all citizens, no matter what our race is, our background, what zip code. That is the bulwark or the backbone of democracy. And if democracy is going to work for all of us, then democracy has to include all of us. And we have to ensure that the freedom to vote is not taken away by any artificial barriers designed to discourage and confuse voters. There are only 3 states, there used to be 4, Virginia, Kentucky, and Iowa, that are still lifetime disenfranchisement states. When you go to court and there is a trial, the courts are responsible for handing down punishment that is appropriate for the circumstances of the crime. Felony disenfranchisement is crime and punishment and continued punishment, and that really is not the way the law should be. If the court is responsible when they say this is your sentence, that really is your sentence, and it can't just keep going on and on and on. All right. I think we are doing very, 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 very well here in terms of time. Actually, I have some information in the letter that people may not be aware of. since I have a little bit of time, this is probably going to shock some of you. Nearly 80 million Americans, or about 1/3 of the US adult population, have some kind of criminal record. There are 19 million Americans that have a felony conviction, and 5.85 million citizens, based on the states where they live, are currently not allowed to vote. As many as 4.4 million of these folks are no longer in prison or jail or incarcerated. They are in our communities, yet they still don't have the ability to vote. That is most definitely taxation. If they are working a job, they are paying taxes. They don't get to say, oh, I have a felony conviction and I can't vote, so therefore I shouldn't pay taxes. It doesn't work that way. This is another example of taxation without representation. All right, now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I am going to turn it over to Josie, and we are going to take a look at how you find your member of Congress's contact information. So Josie, take it away.
Yeah. So if you're like me, you might think this is a really important bill that we want to have passed in our country. And the next step might be, well, I need to know how to contact my member of Congress. So we figured we'd kind of walk you through that today, how to find the phone number and also the district offices of your member of Congress. Noah's going to put the steps that I'm about to show you in the chat. So you can just follow my lead with the link in the chat. So let me just get hang on. All right. I just want to make sure I have my screen in the right place. Oh, alrighty. So when you go to that link, you're going to see what I have up here on my screen. And to find your representative, all you have to do is type in your zip code. So I live in Brooklyn. I'm going to enter my zip. I have two possible representatives. Now, I know mine is Speaker Hakeem Jeffries, but if you're not sure, you can go ahead and enter more of your street address and more specific information. And I'm going to just click on his name, and it's going to take me to his website. Everybody's website is going to be a little bit different, but almost every single representative, and this is the same for US senators, has their district offices and phone numbers at the very bottom of their homepage. While I'm at my screen or while you're looking at yours, I urge you to maybe take out a pad and a pen or take out your notes app on your phone and write down one of the district office phone numbers, because we might be using that at the end of this call. So just make sure, to follow the link in the chat and find one of the phone numbers, maybe for the district office that's closest to you, and write that phone number down, because we might be using that at the end of the call today. Are there any questions about this process?
I just want to jump in and say some of them have a little plus sign, and you have to click the plus sign to expand and see the phone numbers. So if you're like, oh, I don't see phone numbers, you'll see something that says like office locations and then a plus sign, and click the plus sign. And that will depend on your Congress member's website specifically.
Yeah, and sometimes there's also just a contact option in the top. In this case, there's different ways that you can use that contact tool, but generally, if you can't find it at the bottom of the page, it will be visible through that. So with that, I'm going to stop my screen share. We're actually going to show you what your day might look like if you found your district office and made a call to your legislator for setting up a meeting.
Awesome. So yeah, what we're gonna do in this next section is we're actually gonna role play for you 2 example visits for meeting with your elected officials around the Inclusive Democracy Act. So we'll show you kind of what the different roles look like, and then we'll show what it looks like to make a visit. There will be plenty of time for Q&A after, but also feel free to just drop your questions in the chat. And then once we're done with the role play with both of them, we'll review some of the best practices and we'll go back to a PowerPoint with those. So our hope is that by doing this role play, you'll get kind of a feel for how these visits go, and hopefully you'll feel even more confident about making one yourself. So once you get started and you've done a visit or two, we hope those of you who are feeling nervous right now will be like, what was I even nervous about? That was so easy, because you'll be building a real and a powerful relationship with the offices of your elected officials. So Josie and I are going to model for you with a visit to Congresswoman Andrea Miller. And we're both going to play different roles. When you go as a group, it's important to keep in mind what role each person will play. And I want to also note that we're going to send out a toolkit afterwards that very clearly describes what each role does. But I also want to note you don't have to go with a group. It is okay if you go alone. You will just have to juggle a little bit and play all the roles, but that's perfectly fine. So imagine that we have called that number that we all just wrote down on our pad of paper, and we made an appointment with Congresswoman Miller to advocate on the Inclusive Democracy Act. So we're going to get started. Thank you so much for having us, Congresswoman Miller. My name is Noah Barron, and I'm here with my colleague from the Center for Common Ground, Josie, and we're here to visit with you today on the Inclusive Democracy Act.
Number one, I am always thrilled to see young people come and visit me in my office. You would be amazed at how few people bother to come to the office.
Well, we're really glad you're having us today, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to meet with us. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the bill, and then Josie's going to share a story about the bill. So this bill would guarantee anyone the right to vote in federal elections, regardless of a criminal conviction. This would restore the right to vote for 4.4 million Americans who are currently facing taxation without representation. All citizens deserve to be able to make their voices heard, which is why we're urging you to pass the Inclusive Democracy Act. And I'm going to pass it off to Josie to tell a story about that.
Yeah. So Congresswoman Miller, as you know, we live in Virginia, and Virginia is one of the few states where people do not automatically get their right to vote back upon finishing a sentence. I have a neighbor, his name is Frank, and he's 50 years old now, but when he was 18, he was arrested and served his time, but still has a felony conviction on his record. I spoke to Frank recently to let him know that he can technically go to the governor and apply to get his right to vote restored. But our current governor has made that really difficult. I know other people who have technically gotten their rights restored, but were never notified that they got them back. This bill would allow Frank to participate in our democracy. He's been a member of our community for many years. I've known him for a long time, and I believe that he should have the freedom to elect a president, to vote for you, to vote for our senators, without having to struggle and go through all these just hurdles in the governor's office in order to do so. He is a citizen of this country and has a right to participate in it. I know also that you have a wonderful record of supporting other strong voting rights bills, such as the Freedom to Vote Act. And so we're here today because we noticed that this is a bill you haven't yet signed on to, but we really believe it's important for you to be a co-sponsor of. Will you co-sponsor this bill?
Well, thank you very, very much for coming and talking to me about this bill. I know in the past in Virginia, there have been bills that would grant the ability to vote to nonviolent people who had nonviolent felonies, but not people who had violent ones. So it sounds as though this bill grants everybody who has ever had a felony the ability to register and vote. Am I correct?
Correct.
All right. As you said, I am a very strong believer in voting, and I will talk with my legislative director, but it sounds to me like this is certainly a bill that I can and will support. So thank you for bringing it to my attention.
Thank
Thank
you
you so
so
much.
much, Congresswoman Miller. We have one kind of final question for you, which is thank you for your support and how can we get other members of Congress on board? Do you have folks you can call or talk to? How do we get other folks on this bill?
How many people are currently on the bill?
23.
Okay. We do have a voting rights caucus, and I am a member of that caucus. I can certainly bring this bill to the voting rights caucus because I know Bobby Scott, who is on the caucus. I'll check, make sure he's on the bill. And we have, what is it, 11 Virginia representatives. Let's see who we can get from Virginia. And then let's look at other caucus member states and see what we can do from there. Unfortunately, with the House the way it is, this bill is probably not going to get a hearing in committee, but this has been a very strange session, so anything can happen. But I am going to be very, very happy to talk to my Virginia colleagues and also my colleagues on the Voting Rights Caucus. So thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for your time, and we'll be sure to get your email address so we can send you some follow-up materials that you can share with members of your caucus. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us.
Thank you.
Okay, end scene. Now we're gonna open it up for audience questions. What surprised you? What was something that you thought was super important to remember? Just what are your general reactions and thoughts? Go ahead and put them in the chat. And we can answer any questions, and then we'll do a second role play in a moment. And yes, all of the slides and the recording to this whole session will be available. We'll make it available via email for all of you after, and maybe tomorrow you'll get it in email. Any reactions or questions? Yes, we will send you the talking points, absolutely. And you'll also get the letter that will have some of the talking points in it, as well as some more. The personal story made it more relevant, absolutely. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But it's really important. You don't have to be an expert on the facts of the bill. You have to be an expert on why this matters to you. And that's absolutely something you are capable of being an expert on because you know why this matters to you. I love.
And then
Sorry, go ahead.
oh, I saw a question in the chat about the Congress member's email. Normally, if you're going to email a Congress member, you're going to email them through their website, and their email is normally shielded. So you normally don't see it. But when you go to the office, they will, if they give you a card, their email address will be on the card. And will the congressperson know the specs of the bill? Generally, not that well if they are not already a co-sponsor. So that's why it's important that you have someone who explains to them what the bill does.
Especially if there's only like a bill like this with 23 co-sponsors, they may have never heard of it, honestly. if you're sometimes you'll meet with their legislative director, and they actually may know more on the bill, depending on who they are. Are there any other questions or thoughts? Do you see any other ones, Josie, that we
No,
missed?
that was the only other one I saw. So I think, okay, do you recommend sticking to only one issue? Generally, it depends also on how much time you have with that legislator, but yes, it's best to stick with one bill to get them to co-sponsor. If it's a related bill, Andrea, you can speak to this more. It might be more appropriate to combine them. But Andrea, any thoughts on, is it okay, recommend sticking to only one issue when meeting with a representative?
Um, in the early days, I used to do related bills all the time. These days, I would only do one bill at a time. Number one, it's easier for you to keep all the details straight, and it's also easier for the members of Congress. Remember, not all members of Congress are attorneys. Not all members of Congress have any formal training in legislation or law. So members of Congress come from all walks of life. So when there's only one bill and you are concentrating, the likelihood that you will eventually be able to get their support or move them forward is much better. So your goal when you walk into a legislative office is no matter what they say, you want more. So if they say no, you want to get that no into a maybe. Maybe they'll consider it. They'll look at it more closely. They'll consult with the legislative director. If they say, if they are maybe, you want to get them to yes. If they're a yes, then what can you do to bring other members on board? Remember, we might come and see a member of Congress once a month. They see other members of Congress every day. So they have far more access than we ever will. Oh, and then interesting question. If this were to pass, is it relevant to the fall of 2024? It would be, it won't pass in the current Congress. No way. I would bet you $1 million.
So a big part of this too is just a matter of raising awareness. So it's still really important for members of Congress to know about this bill. For example, the Freedom to Vote Act, they knew about it. So anytime it gets reintroduced, you automatically get almost all these people to sign on and co-sponsor. So a big part of this is laying the
Exactly.
groundwork for future
Yes.
years where hopefully it's a bit more of a favorable Congress.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right,
Yes.
because we
So
have
in the 119th Congress, when we pass this bill, then it will be relevant to the midterm elections in 2026, because one of the details of the bill is within 180 days of passage of the bill.
Yep. And just to say, we have to continue building momentum for these bills. It can't just be right when it's going to have impact. It has to, be a constant thing for sometimes for decades, honestly, to get bills passed. Hopefully, this one will not be decades. Fingers
They
crossed.
think the Equal Rights Amendment 1920 to basically Virginia finally ratified in 2020. That's 100 years.
So we have to play the long game sometimes, and and that means building momentum and showing them that the people care about this issue and care about the Inclusive Democracy Act. So there was a question in the chat. What if you get a representative who's more negative, who's not really, who's pushing more, who does not like the response, and asks about people who are currently incarcerated or people who are violent felons? What do you do? So now in a moment, we're going to start a role play with a kind of a more oppositional Congress member. And so obviously there are going to be some members of Congress who are more difficult to persuade, but we want to know you should not count anyone out automatically. Sometimes people can surprise you, and even if you don't persuade them, they are hearing from you and you are showing them what their constituents care about. So let's do this role play now with kind of a with legislative director. You can be a legislative director now. Andrea Miller, whose Congress member opposes the bill. Okay. So hi, legislative director Andrea Miller. Thank you so much for meeting with us today on the Inclusive Democracy Act. My name is Noah Barron. I'm here with my colleague Josie from the Center for Common Ground. And we really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us.
Well, thank you. I don't really have a lot of time. Inclusive democracy. Is this a rehash of that old John Conyers bill, the Democracy Restoration Act? When you mentioned you were coming, it sounded like it was.
It is. It's a reworking of that bill. I can give you a few things about the bill. I know you have a brief amount of time, so we'll be short. And then I can pass it to my colleague Josie just to tell you a more personal story about the bill. So this bill would guarantee anyone the right to vote in federal elections, regardless of a criminal conviction.
So,
This
so murderers would now be out there voting.
Yes, technically, yes. But again, you have to think about this in Virginia, for example, people do not get their right to vote back for their entire lives. People make mistakes often when they're young. It doesn't mean that they have to suffer the rest of their lives without being able to just participate in a very nonviolent form of being a citizen. They're still citizens if they've committed a violent crime, and they should be able to vote nonetheless, especially after if they've already served their time and they've already repented for the crime that they've convicted.
Well, all right. Now I know my member is in favor of nonviolent people getting their rights back. They haven't harmed anybody other than maybe themselves. But I know he is going to have a major, major problem with the thought of violent people, murderers, rapists, all kinds of terrible people out there voting.
the thing
That's
is,
not a starter.
but some states have laws actually that already ensure that no one ever loses their right to vote, regardless of a felony. And we don't see people electing like murderers to office because those people have the right to vote. That's not what we're seeing happening there. It's in Maine and Vermont. People never lose the right to vote.
Yes. And I would
Well,
also
yeah,
remind
those are the socialist states, right?
the congressman that at least at the moment, there are hundreds of thousands of people in our federal prisons, but only about 10,000 of those people are in prison for violent crimes. The majority of those people that's such a small percentage of our population, but they still should have the freedom and to make their voices heard and the right to participate in elections. Voting doesn't make you violent. You should be able to make your voice heard no matter what.
An important point is I know the Congress member has in the past supported bills that have supported racial justice efforts in different ways. And as maybe you know, felony disenfranchisement disproportionately hurts people of color. 1 in 19 Black Americans of voting age are currently disenfranchised, and that's a rate that is 3.5 times higher than the non-Black population.
Yeah.
I was not aware of that, and I don't know that my member was. So, are you going to leave me information with this, like written down on it, so that we can review it? I am still personally not convinced. I am not certain that he will be convinced either. It was interesting speaking with you two young people, but I'm not really seeing this as a bill that our office would support.
Well,
Thank you. Go ahead.
sorry, no, thank you so much. Well, we have some printed materials here that you can show your congressman. And the sponsor of this bill is Congresswoman Presley. We highly recommend that he sets up a meeting with her to learn more about this bill and get more of an idea about why this is so important.
And we will absolutely leave you with that literature. And we have one kind of final question for you, which is what would it take for the Congress member to support this bill?
He served and spent a great deal of time with John Conyers. And that was always one of those interesting bones of contention between the two of them, that Conyers really believed that everybody, whether you were committed a violent crime or not, should be reenfranchised. So I'm I'm not really certain that our heart has changed on this particular issue. But I do thank you for taking the time to come and speak with our office.
Thank
Thank you
you
so
for
much.
meeting with us. Please convey our stance to the Congress member.
We will. Thank you.
Okay, end scene. So I think it's important to note there that you're not always going to get a yes right away. You may not get a yes or even a maybe at all, right? And that doesn't mean it's not worth your time. It absolutely is worth your time. Sometimes we just have to push a little bit, and you'll see that's what I did with that end question. I got Legislative Director Miller thinking about the relationships the congressman had and just what would it take to get the congressman to support this bill. So you just kind of want to push where you can. So now that
Yeah,
we've kind of seen a couple of examples, do you think we have time to answer questions, Josie?
we do.
Yeah, let's take some questions on this round of role play, and then we'll go into the rest of the kind of the big tips and tricks.
Mhm. And while people are putting in questions, I want to also say it's okay to fumble. We had no idea what Andrea would say, so this was totally freestyling.
Andrea had no idea what she
Andrea
was
had no
going
idea
to
what she was
say.
going to say, and that is okay. But as long as you feel like you have, one or two points, it's good to do some research on maybe the member of Congress themselves. What is their stance on other bills that have maybe are kind of related? What is that kind of stuff might be worth doing. But okay.
Oh, and then really nice note from Catherine, who has
Yeah.
lobbied with me in the past. When people are invited to participate in society, they become more invested in society.
Yeah, I love that. I was also thinking, oh, well, sometimes someone might commit a murder. That doesn't mean there's a lot of reasons something can happen that doesn't make them inherently a
Yes,
bad person
yes,
or a violent person. And do they believe in that or not?
yes.
So
Every member of Congress has a legislative director.
yeah. And you'll often meet with them.
Right.
Are
And the
there
legislative director is often, think Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the legislative director is often the smart one.
Are there other questions before we move on to kind of the rest of the slides? And I don't see any other ones.
I don't see any other questions. I
Fine.
think people enjoyed what we did. Oh, here's another one. Yes, yes. Okay. Oh, yes, and that is true. There is a huge difference between a punitive approach and a rehabilitation approach. The punitive approach is not working very well. So again, the notion that by excluding people from participating in society at the most basic level, the ability to vote, you are forcing them to remain as outsiders and they are not allowed to fully participate, which does create all manner of issues. So, yes. And again, I sometimes refer to it as crime, punishment, and continued punishment.
Mm.
People have done their time, and now punishment ends, and they come back into society as full members of that society. Yeah. And again, we did find people who would talk about the stereotypes of those criminals. There will be some people that you are just not ever going to convince. They are in their mind. No, I cannot ever imagine murderers, rapists, baby killers ever voting. You are not going to change their hearts and minds on this one. But there may be other things where you can change their hearts and minds, and or this might be the beginning of a process. That's partially why I threw in that this member of Congress served with John Conyers and was very familiar with the original version of the bill. And yes, it is always appropriate to ask the person what is their major disagreement with the bill, or what is keeping them from supporting this bill. And they will normally tell you.
Absolutely. Should we pull up the rest of the slides and finish the?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, and I love that quote. We are all more than the worst thing we have ever done. Oh, am I pulling up the slides or you guys pulling up the slides?
I think you are, Andrea, if that still works for you. So we're gonna
it works for me.
get into kind of more weeds of.
All right. I was having my fun. So here we go. And all right, let's keep talking about this, shall we? All right. Now, I've been having such a good time with you guys doing this. We are talking today about engaging your elected officials in your hometown. This is very, very special because when the voters at home come to the office, legislators really take note. When people go to the office in DC, these are the lobbyists, these are the groups that show up once a year. So for most legislators, this is a photo op opportunity, and that is exactly how they look at it when groups come and you're there once a year. But if you are able to establish a relationship with your legislators and you begin to go on a reasonably frequent basis, you begin to form a relationship. And once you have a relationship, your conversations about legislation will become less guarded and more honest, and people will begin to volunteer. Well, we could support this bill if, but, it's doing that. So in the next iteration of the bill, can it be changed? And also, other people that they believe, well, this is not something we can support, but, go talk to, they were talking about doing a bill similar to this. Maybe, they'd be willing to work on it. So in your hometown, you make a bigger difference than you ever would going to DC. All right, values. Noah, do you want to do this one?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. So we just want to make it clear that your voice matters. And what's key here is that you don't have to be an expert. Like we said before, you don't have to know the exact details of the bill. It's okay if you haven't read every single word of it. You need to be an expert on why this matters to you and why you think this bill is important. So you can really think about your own experience, think about your own community. Is this bill helping you directly? Do you know someone who's been disenfranchised? Can you talk about that story? And if you don't have a story, it's okay to simply say that it's wrong in the 21st century that we're taking away the right to vote from American citizens. So really, we encourage you to think about the values that matter to you if you don't have a particular story. But legislators want to be able to point to you. You introduce yourself, you tell your story, you tell your values, and then they go repeat that to other people when they're talking about it. So really what you're sharing with them is absolutely critical. Um, yeah, that's a kind of, do you have anything to add on that, Andrea, on kind of how
Yes,
you
yes.
values,
What I
please?
was going to add is your stories will frequently end up on the floor when legislators are speaking for or against the bill. They tell stories. I had a constituent come into my office a few weeks ago, and they were telling me about the da 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 da. It never, ever, I never tire of hearing legislators repeat stories that they heard from constituents. Remember, we as regular people living our regular lives, for some legislators, we represent an experience that is totally outside their own.
Um,
Now,
Go ahead.
oh, I was getting ready to do this. Were you going to add something, Noah?
No, I was gonna do this one, so please go ahead.
Oh,
You're
yes, yes, yes.
so yeah, this is the point we were kind of making earlier, where you just want to kind of seek to influence and persuade and pressure, which can sometimes feel uncomfortable for you. It's okay to acknowledge that in your own head. You're not always gonna get a yes. You might get a maybe, but you want to push just a little bit.
And I'm going to grab a piece of this. I, when I used to teach this, one of the questions I would ask people is, who are the most effective lobbyists in the world? And people would try to remember, oh, wait a minute, did I hear about some really, effective law firm? And then I would explain the most effective lobbyists in the world are children. When a child wants something, they are going to be consistent in their ask, and they are going to be persistent. They don't just ask he wants, they keep coming back. Um, Cora, is this a quick question?
Right now, people are not able to unmute
Oh,
themselves. Yeah.
okay. All right. Cora, drop it in the chat, please. All right, we already covered this. I'm going to just grab this one to go over it quickly. Effective advocacy moves the needle. You turn no into maybe. Every once in a while, it just remains no, and there are reasons for that. You're not going to be 100%, nobody is. But you want to turn maybe into yes, and you want to turn yes into can I help build support? Noah, Josie, you want to do pick this one up?
I can hop in. Noah mentioned this a little bit when we were going through the role play, but even if you know your legislator isn't going to co-sponsor the bill, it's the building of relationships that's really crucial. It's important to show your face and let your legislator know that you are paying attention, that you are engaged and involved around issues that are important to you and your community. And with every visit you make, you get to also learn more about what's important to your legislator in order to maybe come up with more strategies about things that you could convince them on in the future. A big part of this really is a relationship building process.
I know when Rick was consistently on the Hill, there was an Alabama office that we made it a point to visit every single time we were on the Hill. And the legislative director, when we came in opposition of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, actually acknowledged, he said, you folks have been in here every month, sometimes twice a month, and we have disagreed with everything, but we agree with this. And he made it a point of thanking Rick for his persistence. Team roles. Take it away, team.
Yeah, so as we said a little bit before the role play, there's kind of a few different roles during the meeting. And you can divide these up for different people. You can have, we would say no more than 5 people, then it becomes a little overwhelming. Or you can be one person and you can do all the roles yourself. And in the toolkit we'll email you after, we'll kind of describe more what each role does. But basically there's the facilitator who, introduces everyone and kind of runs the meeting. There's the secretary, and this is a very important role, who takes notes and collects cards and writes everything down, because you want to be able to remember and refer back to what the Congress member said or the legislative director said during the meeting. There's the educator, which is kind of what my role was during the meeting, where you present the facts. It's okay if you just have a bullet point list of 4 or 3 facts. And then there's 1 or 2 storytellers who are constituents who tell stories about why this matters to them or how they ground it in their values. And then there's the person who makes the ask, and you don't want it to be implicit. You want to directly ask, will the Congress member support the Inclusive Democracy Act?
So to set up a meeting, you will go through a similar process to what we showed you earlier on in the call. You can also just, if you know who your representative is, you can type their name in Google, and then you can make an official request for a meeting. Sometimes they'll have a form on their website that they prefer. Otherwise, or you can send a request via email and then follow up with a phone call into the office that you're hoping to set up a meeting. You can meet with them in person in their district office in DC if you happen to be on the Hill, or over Zoom. And if the legislator is not available, make sure to ask for either the legislative director or a staffer who handles voting or voting rights, or if it's a different legislation, that they cover that topic. And if it's just you or maybe 2 of you that are showing up to the meeting, that doesn't mean you can't show the support that there is in your community for this bill. If you want to get signatures on a piece of paper on the letter, people to sign on digitally so you can print out the letter and show all the names of people who support this bill when you show up, we highly recommend doing that as well. And then after you have a meeting, you'll likely get a card from the staffer or the legislator that you're meeting with. That card will have an email, and you can send to that email. You should always send a thank you letter. In that thank you letter, you should reiterate the points that you were talking about, maybe attach a letter that you actually gave them during the meeting, and make sure to then build more support, do more research before the next time that you show up, and always stay in touch and keep that relationship alive. And
try to find common ground, which is the name of our organization. So are we going to have people contact their legislator now?
We're going to work on that muscle of contacting our legislators, because it's kind of like a workout where you got to keep it active. You got to do it all the time. So we're going to actually, with that number you wrote down earlier, hopefully you wrote it on a pad of paper, or you have it on your phone notes app, or you have it up. We're gonna call our legislators, and this is kind of the script. You're also free to add your own point, or to edit this a little bit, but this is the script you can read. And we're all gonna take like What do you think? The next 3 minutes, and then we'll wrap up till
Yep.
1 to the hour.
Yeah. And remember, this is after hours for most offices, so you'll be leaving a voicemail in most cases. But we just wanted to give you a chance to, practice a little bit, talking to your legislator about this bill.
And they also do listen to voicemail, so it is good to leave a voicemail.
All right, we'll come back. All right, if you all are still finishing up your calls, please do so, but I know we'll have just about a minute until we're at the hour, in case we wanted, so that we could wrap up really quickly. Andrea, I don't know if there's one more slide, I believe, but I can just talk about it. We are having a few upcoming events. The Workers Circle has, and ourselves, as well as other partner organizations, are now hosting guided phone banks to call voters. Right now, it's Black voters in Georgia for the congressional primaries. We host guided trainings almost every day of the week now, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Worker Circles on Wednesdays. I will share all these links, by the way, in a follow-up email. And one other event that's actually the next effective citizen advocacy training will be June 6th. Again, this is a monthly webinar that we do. We have the training every month covering a different pro-democracy bill. And if you're interested in learning more about the Center for Common Ground and the work that we're doing, next week on Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, we are going to be holding a webinar talking about the work that we do in Georgia, as well as a coalition that we've built called Team Unity in North Carolina to really build voter power in the state. So I will send all these upcoming event links in the follow-up email tomorrow.
And thank you all for coming tonight and for learning how to be an effective citizen advocate from your hometown. We hope you'll make a visit soon, and feel free to reach out to us with questions or thoughts. Thank you all so much.
Yeah.
All right. Wonderful. Wonderful. So good night, everybody. Yes, I saw some interesting things in the chat. Cora, I will send you an email on this. Yeah, those are the toughest bills because it's just really, really hard to get anything where we are changing child welfare, anything about children. That's always been hard. It has become even harder these days, especially if it's progressive. All right, I am going to end the recording.